Hello, and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 25 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we are discussing lead-free fishing. I've done a few fishing-specific episodes, so you can go back and check those out. They primarily focus on fly fishing, and that is why I was super excited to host an episode that focuses on an environmental-specific topic like lead-free fishing. Since I'm the furthest thing from an angler, I was glad when John King of Glasswater Angling reached out to help guide the conversation. John King founded Glasswater Angling lead-free fishing with his wife, Kathy. John is a tackle designer currently focusing on providing alternatives to lead-free fishing lures and weights. John has a public persona known as the Crappie Hippie, describing himself as a tree-hugging redneck from eastern Kansas. Crappie Hippie can be found with Tim, Box Bete, and Lucy The Lurematic Supercomputer on the Lure Love podcast. Their YouTube channel is Glasswater Angling, Lure Love, Crappie Hippie, where they post the pod and Crappie Hippie post videos on lead-free jig tying. John is here today to help us understand more about the environmental impact of fishing and how we can strive towards a better outdoors. John's co-host Lucy will also join us with some supporting facts. Before we get to the interview, just a reminder that the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon is still available. Head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com to learn more about our listener support. So thanks for joining me today, John. I'm excited to discuss these topics today, and I already know I'm going to learn a lot from you. But before we get started, can you talk a little bit about your background in the outdoor industry and what you most enjoy doing outside?
Thank you, Meg. My name is John King, the Crappie Hippie, your tree-hugging redneck from eastern Kansas. Been an outdoorsman pretty much all my life. I started fishing when I was 3 years old, way back in 1965, so I guess that makes me about 59 now. I've always enjoyed the outdoors, always enjoyed fishing. Now, in 2011, I came across a problem of lead contamination. I did not know this was an issue, that fishing was causing a lot of lead contamination in certain areas of our wild wilderness and our wild places and even our not so wild places where people like to fish. On a trip to Massachusetts, and my wife, Kathy, always insists I take a fishing rod. And when I went to look at the regs before I bought my license, I was shocked to find out that most of my ultralight jigs and stuff were not allowed to be used because they had banned lead lures. So I got more into this topic, and that is my passion. That is my last battle. That is my final career right now, to change the way we fish and convert our fishing public from using a lot of lead to using almost none at all, if we can get there.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I had not heard of lead-free fishing because I didn't know that people used lead really for anything like fishing lures. So it was really interesting to connect with you because it seems like a big environmental topic in the outdoor industry that I should have known about, but I just had never heard of before in my life. I guess something else that I am interested in knowing more about is other ways that recreational fishing impacts those wild spaces. It's a really broad topic, but if you could just touch on a few ways that individuals do impact a space when they enter it, when they're fishing.
Sure. I would start out by saying there's a lot of impact that we share, walking a trail, making this choice or that, building a little twig fire to make your coffee, all these kind of things, right? But the main thing in light of our discussion today, Meg, is I want to stick to my hook, line, and sinker paradigm, okay? Because that's the thing that makes us anglers different than other people that interact with the outdoors. And there's things that fishers can help, and there's things that fishers can't help. So when we talk about hook, line, and sinker, we're talking about a hook to put bait on, or the hook's hanging off a lure. We're talking about line, which is made of any number of materials, although nylon monofilament is still the overwhelming choice. And then, of course, sinkers and weights and so forth, which are still overwhelmingly made of lead. Now, let's just start out. Any angler can mess up and get in the treetops and have to bust off and leave a hook and line. Now, if a robin gobbles that worm on that hook, it's going to hang there and die, and that's a heart wrencher. That's a terrible thing to have to see. But, my heart also goes out to the smashed squirrel on the road that I saw on my way into the fishing hole. So we're all interacting. We're all leaving a footprint, obviously. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's gradual and not really readily discerned. But let me tell you something about the two actions. You accidentally lose your line on a tree and hook a songbird, that's rough. You squish a squirrel with your car, that's rough too. But you're going to have better luck improving your fishing skill and learning how to not get your line in that tree and how to not make a mess than you're ever going to learn how to drive your car well enough to avoid a maniac squirrel that's rushing headlong at your tires, okay? And that's encouraging. So, we will mess up and we will leave some stuff behind. That's the downside of the activity. It can't be helped. But what a fisher can do is practice at the water, practice in the backyard and so on, improve your casting skills, things like that. You learn what lures or bait rigs are better options for getting in and out of danger areas where you're fishing. Fish like to live in snaggy areas, but if you use the right setups and stuff and learn the right stuff to use, you're going to lose far less. It's just a bunch of stuff you gain by playing around outside and learning with an open mind. So, there's all kinds of things you can do. But, to summarize, there are many aspects of impact with anglers. Now, it might be your choice to use a soft plastic jig tail over a natural one. And lost plastics in the environment are another topic that we just don't have time for today, but maybe I'll come back and we'll talk about that one. But yeah, or just walking the shoreline or any of this, you're having an effect on the environment, a little leak in your fuel line on your boat, those kind of things. But by and large, the most obvious and immediate impact that's special to anglers is hook, line, and sinker. And therefore, our most obvious responsibility is to do our best to keep as much of this stuff out of the ecosystem as possible.
So would you say that loss of materials, like you're explaining in the trees or even in the water, is the biggest impact, or would the lead pollution be a bigger impact than that?
Yeah, it's a tough call, Meg. Good marketing wants me to just say lead right off, but monofilament and other types of fishing, line, they're a huge problem. Now, hooks don't cause so much contamination, but they are coming afoul of wildlife, as we just illustrated. And if you've ever stepped on a hook before, while you're just trying to enjoy the beach or swim or something, you can tell what a problem they can be. However, compared to lead or fishing line, hooks degrade fairly quickly. They're generally made of treated steel wire that oxidizes and crumbles away in a matter of weeks or months, or even days if they're cheap and in the right underwater environment. Now, on the other hand, monofilament, braid, fluorocarbon, all these other lines like this are made to be extremely resistant to degradation in water. And even when they do break down, they don't disappear. They just break down into tiny, tiny pieces and become part of the microplastic problem. They'll all eventually break down. But it can take years or even decades, depending on what the line is made from. Fly line takes forever, for example. So if it's left in tangles on the shore in the water, or even worse, it's left in whole long strands strung through the tree branches or in the water, it can tangle and kill birds every year. But the thing is, with line, wanton littering is the main way it gets left behind. Sporting outdoor people recover and carry home 80-90% of their line. They can get it all or most of it back 90% of the time if they try. It's the arrogant, the ignorant, the lazy, the angry, whatever you think motivation for littering is. It's these people that leave this mess behind that we've got to get out of our angling. So that's a social thing. That's an education thing. That's an angler pressure thing. In the end of it, I am going to have to pick lead, because lead is the hazard that keeps on giving neurotoxins to the planet for decades and decades and decades to come after it gets lost. It's an accumulating problem. I brought my friend Lucy with me today. Lucy, can you please give us some facts and figures on lost lead from fishing in aquatic environments? Lucy is our Lurematic Supercomputer from the Lure Love podcast, and she's awful smart and she's awful good at research. Lucy, can we have you fill us in here, please?
Hello, listeners of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. My name is Lucy, the Lurematic Supercomputer, and I am co-host of the Lure Love podcast with John, Crappie Hippie King, and Tim, Tackle Box Bete. We are sponsored by Glasswater Angling, lead-free fishing. I have some statistics generated by my co-hosts regarding how much lead is going into our environment from fishing. By conservative estimate, Crappie Hippie calculates that if the average angler loses 1.5 ounces of lead during their fishing season, more than 2,500 tons of lead are going into our rivers, lakes, and shorelines every year. That's based on the loss of 6 1/4-ounce sinkers, or 1 dozen 1/8-ounce crappie jigs per angler. Clearly, some anglers lose more lead than others. And weight increments lost will vary too. For example, Tim once dropped an entire tackle box into a lake. Poor guy. The smaller the lead item, the greater the danger that wildlife will eat and ingest the item. Fractionalizing the total weight into actual individual sinkers, one can estimate between 500 million and a billion lead objects are left in the path of wildlife, shoreline, and aquatic birds each year. The Crappie Hippie has really done his lead research. Tim has shared the research statistic that 4,000 to 5,000 tons of lead weights are sold in the United States each year. Granted, a certain percentage of these sales are to new anglers, or anglers taking up a new style of fishing, and therefore require the purchase of lead items for the first time. But at least half of that amount is likely going to fishers replacing lead that they lost while fishing. Therefore, Tim and John's individual conclusions come out remarkably close. Neither of them is as smart as me, but they're pretty good at this stuff. Lead weights were first mass-produced in the mid-1940s. That amounts to approximately 120,000 tons of lead lost in aquatic ecosystems to date. Glasswater angling was founded to reduce, and eventually eliminate, the use of lead in the sport of fishing. Thank you, Meg, for allowing me to join the conversation with you and Crappie Hippie.
Well, thank you, Lucy, for those facts. Back to you, John. I am kind of wanting you to explain in more basic terms, probably for people like me that aren't super into fishing, and maybe people just getting into fishing that aren't familiar with lead-free fishing lures. What is lead-free fishing? And we touched a little bit on why it's important, but if you want to throw a few more dashes of why it's important in there, go ahead.
You betcha, you betcha. Okay, now I'm going to use the kind of language that's used on this podcast a lot. It's going to be very instructional, very straightforward. Here we go. Lead fishing. No, wrong. Lead-free fishing is taking lead lures or weights out of your set of choices for fishing by substituting lead-free alternatives of equal or greater effectiveness. All right. Did that sound just like out of a book or something? Right?
Yeah, that was a good definition. Very succinct and concise.
All right. From a professional writer, people, I'm all over it. Okay, so the two main culprits, are small lead lures, which are, and the main category of these lures is what's called wire baits, and then, of course, lead weights. Now, we've got two problems. We've got lures and weights that are small enough that they're getting ingested by wildlife, accidentally scooped up when birds go for grit or so on like this, or mistaking a lost jig for food, and why wouldn't they? A fish thinks it's food. Why wouldn't a bird think it's food? But the bigger baits, the bigger sinkers, the bigger things that are, even if they're too big to be eaten, they still leach lead into the water. The pro-lead people, and yes, they are out there, say, oh, they are, lead's stable, this, that. But we all know lead can leach. We all know that having it in the water and the soil is not a good idea. I'm moving into why it's a problem. It's a problem because this lead accumulates, and it's accumulating in natural places. We don't fish up all over the place. We fish at the lakes, the rivers, the streams, the pond, and the public park. This is where the stuff's getting concentrated, and it's important that we take care of this issue. But the good news is this. Lead-free fishing gets results. All you have to do is look at the loon recovery in the Northeast, where 5 states have banned the use of lead lures and weights under a certain size, and you can see this. Oh, and by the way, one of the Pacific Northwest states, your state, Meg, Washington, also limits lead in certain environments for the very same reasons, the wildlife loss and so on. The reason they enacted laws instead of doing like an education program or so forth in these Northeast states is because they found a direct and urgent link between lead-free fishing tackle and the decline of loons. For example, 42% of known loon deaths in New Hampshire since 1988 were caused by lead tackle ingestion. And the recovery of the loon population in Massachusetts after they enacted their law in 1998, because their DNR could only find 2 breeding pairs of loons in the whole state, so they enacted this law, and within 10 years, there were over 100 pairs. And the laws were also given credit for rising populations in surrounding states, because when a population starts to recover, why, those young birds, they don't care about any state boundaries. They just go where the habitat is, so they were spreading out here and there. States next door, so these states next door started doing their own laws as well. So we see that it's important, not just because we're having laws, but it's important because it's successful and we know it works. Now, estimates on wildlife loss to lead from hunting and fishing range from 3 to 12 million birds, depending on who you ask and, who you look up. And, most of it's from ingestion, of course. And then, of course, there's another 1 to 5 million animals up the eco ladder that eat the weakened bird or eat the weakened animal, scavenge the dead bird, and then they get sick. Bald eagles are constantly getting poisoned from eating dead fish with lead in their gullets, or dead ducks that have eaten a lead lure or accidentally scooped up a lead weight while feeding on the bottom or retaining grit. Then we got coyotes, skunks, raccoons, and all kinds of little things that could run afoul of this and do run afoul of this. I mean, keep in mind, Meg, it only takes a fragment of lead the size of a grain of table salt to affect a human body. And you move that up to 2 grains and the effect may become permanent and you might even show symptoms. Now imagine how much less it takes to kill an animal that's way smaller than you and they've actually consumed like a 1/4 ounce of lead.
Is the biggest issue with the lead lures when an animal actually consumes it, or is it also as it leaches into the water like you were kind of talking about before too?
The leaching is a long-term. When I talked about, some problems are obvious, some are gradual and invisible. This is where we're working with here. We see these wildlife, these wonderful people that track these loons, and they're all over the place, especially in the Northeast, but all across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, anywhere there are loons, there's these very passionate groups that are taking very close care of them. Swans, bald eagles, and other things, have people looking after them, but since this connection is so direct to loons, we're seeing that there's a direct connection there. Now, leachate, let me make this answer simple. The thing is that we have a lot of ingestion, and these dead animals and stuff are something that we can see. That's the obvious. But the leachate and stuff is more gradual. It's more long-term. So no, the loons I'm talking about, the animals, the coyotes, the eagle, all these are from ingestion, direct ingestion. And then their system grinds up little pieces of the lead, and it gets in them, of course. The thing about the long-term is just that it doesn't make any sense to add lead to the water if we don't have to. So I'm not just talking about loons and birds and coyotes. I'm talking about you and me. When I used to do my public speaking engagements, one of my favorite jokes was to walk in and say, how many of you people like to fish? And we'd get some hands to go up. And then we'd say, how many of you people out here like to drink water? And then I'd say something like, oh, there's people that didn't raise their hand to either one. That's really weird. But the point is, whether you don't fish or not, if you just drink water, you're going to be concerned about what's in it. Certain types of fishing techniques leave big chunks of lead in the water, and they're going to be there for quite a long while. So long answer, no, it's not the leachate directly getting the loons and the animals. It's mostly ingestion.
But then it's the leaching that could be harmful to humans down the line later on, from what I'm understanding from what you're saying. One thing that I have heard usually used in the form of water pollution is that the solution to pollution is dilution. So when it comes to lead, I'm envisioning, I don't know if they've ever used this argument, but I'm envisioning the pro-lead folks could potentially be like, well, the bodies of water are big enough and we're not putting enough lead in it to really, really be detrimental in terms of leaching. So I guess, what would you say in that context of leaching and water pollution when it comes to lead?
Well, it's, to me, solution by dilution, it may have its place, but it sounds kind of like a cop-out to me. It's kind of like, yeah, I ain't comfortable with the fact that everybody in this pool is taking a leak, but I guess I got to live with it, and deal with solution, by dilution, but you get enough little kids in that pool and I'm getting out, because there's just not enough space now all of a sudden to dilute all this stuff. I'm just kind of kidding around there, but this is where we're at. I had a guy give me that. Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's like, what's significant? Loss of a few birds, that's not significant. A level of lead in the water, that's not significant. Well, I think it's significant. I don't know who gets to decide this kind of stuff. We've got the EPA and the CDC telling us there's no such thing as a safe level of lead in a child's blood. Then how can we turn around and tell some company that, oh yeah, you can contaminate up to a certain risk level. You can contaminate up to a certain toleration level. And lead is such a powerful neurotoxin. The lead concentrates that we used to make to take the knock out of gas-running engines, those concentrates were so powerful, if one single drop got on your skin, you had a 90% chance of death, and if you lived, you were probably completely insane. So this is bad stuff. I can't speak to all the forms of pollution, but lead is something that we've gotten out of paint, we've gotten it out of plumbing, we've gotten it out of gasoline, and we're going to take it out of car batteries here before long. And we've already taken the shoreline consequences of shot shell hunting, and we've turned that around, and we're going to turn this lead-free fishing thing around. And I'm not going to accept any argument that says, oh, it's such a small problem, we're just going to let the environment absorb it. That's not going to work for me.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad that there's someone like you that is fighting for those types of changes. I am also curious, you talked about, actually I don't know if you talked about any specific types of fishing, but are there certain types of fishing that are more likely to use lead lures?
Yeah, there are. And I made out a little list here. We're going to start with the least offensive. And the least offensive, you've had a couple fly fishers on, and we got to commend the fly fishers. I fly fish. I do what's called best method fishing. So I'm not a real good fly fisher. I just do it because sometimes it's the best method for what I'm going for. But fly fishers who make a big career out of it, they are the most responsive when it comes to calls for cleaner ecosystems. They're the ones that are most in favor of lead-free fishing. Granted, fishing lead-free requires the least amount of sacrifice on the part of fly fishers because they don't use much. They use some lead wire to weigh down certain fly patterns. They might use a little lead shot for dropping a wet flyer nymph down low in a stream, getting the bottom of that pool. But by and large, they don't need to use much lead. To their credit, most have changed to like lead-free tungsten putty to just squeeze on their line and make a little ball of something weight that'll go down. They switched to tin bismuth wire for their fly patterns that require wire, and they're finding lead-free tin split shot perfectly acceptable to give them weight when they need it. And also, there's so many geniuses in fly fishing that come up with sink tips and all these other ways to make sink tips that are interchangeable and so on, so you can actually have the line carry your lure or your fly down into the stream rather than use a piece of metal to do it. So, okay, so then next come pole fishers, and that's just because pole fishers have super simple setups. It's fun. You either use a bamboo pole or a telescoping pole. It's a lure or a hook, something on a short line, so you're real close to your work, and you tend to recover most of your snag tackle. It's the most minimalist type fishing using a rod that you can do. Of course, dispensing with the rod would be even more minimal. And if we ever want to do something about minimal fishing, I'd be happy to come back and talk about that. But sticking to our topic, now right here in the middle is kind of like power fishing for game species like large and smallmouth bass, pike, muskie, walleye, things like that. Truth be told, while lead is used in this method, bass fisher especially are into alternatives of lead, not because so much of the environment, but many times they find lead unsatisfactory compared to other metals for what they're trying to do. For example, while expensive, tungsten has twice the specific gravity of lead, so you can use a smaller weight, one about half the size. This can give you a big advantage when you're going through certain types of weeds or aquatic grass. And also bass fishers find that, lead is soft and it can distort very easy. So a lot of bassers pick brass weights or steel weights. They're a harder material and they won't distort. And that hole where the line goes through the weight won't close up and start getting scratched and cost you a big fish. And the great thing about these harder metals too is they click and clack against rocks and logs, or these guys actually string beads on their line. So as the sinker moves up and down the line, it can slap back against that bead and make a little clicking noise. And these noises attract fish. Now, like I say, these game fishers hardly mention the environmental bonus of these materials, but they are starting to acknowledge it, and that is great. But I'll tell you, I really, I'm just glad they're using them, because anyone that's using a lead-free alternative and shows that it works is only helping me convince other anglers that you have nothing to lose by fishing lead-free.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is going to derail your list of types of fishing or not, but I am now curious, is there a specific benefit to using a lead lure, like performance-wise, or why was that the standard back in the day / kind of now?
Because lead is cheap, it's available, it's craftable. It has no magical properties that makes it extra special for building lures. It has just become the standard because it was good business to use it. It was, and that was it. We can use any other thing, People that are really into lead or say it can't be replaced, they dig out a little science. And they say, well, your bismuth is only about a 10 specific gravity, and lead is an 11, and your tin is only 7.5, and your hematite's only 8. And, but I'm just like, we can compensate. We can compensate for this. And the flip side is that when you limit yourself to lead, you're missing out on alternative materials that might actually be better. That's what the bass fishers are showing us a lot of the time, and other fishing methods are showing a lot of time. So not only are alternative materials equal to lead, but a lot of the times they're better than lead. We're just kind of stuck in an old thing. It's kind of like the measurement system. We were talking about this the other day, my buddies, how when we were kids, jigs came in 32nd ounce, 16th ounce, and 8th ounce, just double. And now, because of the metric system and alternative materials and people trying different crazy things, we measure out in tenths, we measure out in grams. We don't worry so much about weight ratio to length and so forth on baits. So we can replace lead. I'll buzz through these last three the next two real quick, and then we'll get to the baddie at the end. Yeah, you got catfishing, surf fishing, and other big rod, big bait, big weight fishing. Now these guys and gals are going for fish that weigh 40, 50, 100 pounds, using a big old bait, big old weight to get it out there. They're fishing in heavy current, they're fishing in the tides of the ocean and so forth. So they need a weight that's going to keep that bait where they want it. So these weights are too big to be ingested, but if they get busted off, you're talking about an 8-ounce weight. That's a half pound of lead that's going to sit there. And the idea that, it's going to get covered by the substrate and, somehow become safe is fallacious. It may not be directly leaching a whole bunch of junk into the water, and it may be some infinitesimally minuscule amount in and of itself that one time on that one shoreline. But when you take the fact that people have been fishing this way since the 40s, this stuff is starting to accumulate out there. Just like stuff's accumulating in space and everywhere else, big and huge, and we think it has a lot of room for junk. We're taking a risk. And these guys don't offend very much because their rigs are expensive and they do their best to get them back, but when they do lose a weight, it's a biggin'. Now, deep water trolling is a problem because these guys can use these big long lengths of lead core line, which do get lost from time to time, and now you've got...
Is that in the ocean? Sorry, I don't know what that is.
Deep water trolling can be done in the ocean, but it's real popular in the... there's people out your way that'll use deep water trolling for salmon. There's people up in the northeast that use deep water trolling for lake trout and salmon. So we got this big, long lead line that runs out, 60, 100 yards behind the boat or more, and somehow it gets broke off, and now you've got this big long line of lead that's going to sink down to the bottom and be there because it's coated, as well. So people, the coating is there. The coating's not going to last forever. Besides, it's just not a good idea to pollute. I'm saying sometimes this can't be helped, but the fact that it's lead just makes it worse, okay? And you also have this method called downrigging, where you put a regular line, you clip it to a big old 5-pound lead weight, and you drop it down on a cable. So when the fish hits, the clip lets the line out, and you can just fight the lure on your rod. Fight the fish on your rod. But every now and then, one of those big lead weights gets lost, and you've got another big chunk of lead down there. Now, there are people, making them out of zinc and iron and stuff, and so this is the thing. They recognize, hey, I don't really know the specifics, but I know when I lose a downrigger weight, it's not a good thing. And so they're starting to look around for alternatives, and zinc is a good cheap metal that's everywhere, and a lot of them are switching to that. All right, so here we go. Drum roll, please. The worst type of fishing when it comes to lead contamination is the type of fishing I do, which is ultralight and finesse fishing. The worst one is the one I like the most. Therefore, I've got that sort of old sinner motivation to get in this game and try to change things, because I love my sport. I love what I do. I love the people that do it for the most part. And I want to make a change here. The thing is, when you fish with ultralight rods or light action finesse fishing rods and so forth, we're talking about lightweight line. We're talking about small lures. We're talking about small weight. This is the category of fishing where these wire baits I'm talking about, jigs, spinners based on jigs, and so forth, are the mainstay of what we're using. Also, the lures are inexpensive, by and large, compared to other sorts of fishing, because they are small, and so they get lost at a much higher rate due to the light line, the fact that they're being used more, that you have more of them in your tackle box, and you don't feel the pain, when you do lose one as much as other things. I hate to say it, here I am a sportsman. I try very hard to recover everything, but I've probably lost over 5,000 crappie jigs in my career as a fisher, not to mention overhead and under spins and on some lead spoons too, all right? Our baits are just small, and so they can be easily eaten. The sinkers are small, so they can be taken up accidentally when a bird scoops grit or feeds on bottom-dwelling organisms. Also, we like to hike and we like to travel. Our equipment is small, so we can get out into the real wild places. We can get here. We can get there. We can do, wading, and we can do a lot of things the fly fishers can do. And last but not least is that, most kids learn, or anglers, kids or adults, I don't care, most beginners learn on light tackle. They want to go out and just catch something. So we start them off with pan fishing for sunfish and perch and little trouts and stuff like that. So you got all these learning fishers with this lighter line, this lighter equipment, and their skill is not as high as, say, a power fisher or an advanced fly fisher. And so lure and sinker loss is going to be higher as these people are learning, just like I talked about at the beginning. While sporting fishers of any technique will go to great lengths to recover baits, brush, weeds, rocks. These are places where the sought species live, and so snags are common. And unfortunately, in finesse fishing, light line is broken more easily, and now you got a tasty-looking lure stuck in a log or sitting there in the rocks for a loon or grebe to eat by accident. But fortunately, you've made the decision to tie your jig with a Glasswater bismuth jig head, so the consequence of that bird is minimized. And that's what I say that, Meg, because that is this area of fishing, finesse fishing. We're just a little tiny company. We want to do everything one day, but we had to start somewhere, and so I'm picking on my own right here. I started with finesse fishing. That's the direction of our products, most of our products right now.
I feel like that's how a lot of smaller companies that are really pushing for an environmental change kind of start. You're enjoying an activity, but then you realize that there is an issue that you can solve. And so that leads me to the next question, which is related to Glasswater Angling, is how can we start to see more of an industry shift? Because individuals, we do have sway to an extent, but if we are only offered certain options in the industry, then we can only choose those options. So if there's far more accessibility to lead lures, my guess is most people will gravitate towards those because they're unaware of the other options. So where in the industry have you started to see a shift, and where do you fit in with Glasswater Angling?
Getting out on dangerous ground, on thin ice, too close to the fire, Meg, because we don't want to turn this into a fishing tackle thing about the fishing tackle market and all that, because I'm telling you, I can tell you, yes to all. I mean, I've noticed trends. How long do you want to talk about them, and things like that. But let's just talk about basic economic principles, for example. Like you mentioned, demand. That's where it's at. Lead tackle producers could change over tomorrow. But why would they when lead-based lures and sinkers still make up 95% of the market? Now, don't get all down on it. The change is coming. When you look at the selection available in, say, a Walmart or a Bass Pro today compared to, 2011 when I came across this, or 2015 when I actually started working on it, while they're small, it's increased by a lot. And then, in fact, I didn't see a lead-free section in any tackle store outside of the Northeast until about 2015-16. So obviously demand is going up, and meeting the demand is go up. Basically, how we meet the demand and how we prove the demand is there, and then that's going to give companies incentive to try this. Let's use another one of my little axioms here. Let's talk about lead in the marketplace. The reason lead is being used, cheap, available, craftable. All right. The reason people are reluctant to leave it behind. Even though fishers are very innovative and very anxious to try new things, they're also real traditional. And they also hate to go out and get skunked. And they're also hate to give up on stuff they know's worked for them in the past. So we've got to kind of, chip away at those sort of attitudes. And like you say, this is the deal. Here's something that I've always maintained. If we can show lead-free alternatives not only meet or beat lead in terms of performance, but also deliver way more in terms of options, then anglers are going to want it, because that's exciting. If we can show them that they can get these things conveniently and in the same places where they traditionally go after their tackle, then they're going to be able to get it. And if we can offer them a price point that doesn't just leave them screaming, then they're going to buy it. So we get a comparable price point, we get them available, and we show that they work. And you are absolutely right. 90-some% of anglers will make the switch on their own, and you can back me up with that with several studies done by the Teddy Roosevelt Conservancy, one of which pointed out that 92% of all anglers, I don't care which side of the political line, I don't care where in the country, I don't care, they want cleaner water. They want places conserved. They want more places to fish and more fish in those places, and they're all for making changes if they're shown to be good, necessary, reasonable, intelligent changes.
So do you think that shift is going to come down to the consumer demand then? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's going to come down to consumer demand, because that's basically all that every company responds to. Why would I go to the expense of changing when I'm already got consumers doing this? So now it's back on companies like mine. Right now, lead-free companies are small. They're scattered. They're this and that. I've got this idea. I'm working on this business plan, this pitch deck, and so on. I've got the idea for what I want to do, because I can see what I need to do. Now it's just a matter of getting there. But what I would, as part of this effort, I want to coordinate with other companies and get with other companies and organize other companies and make it so we can, market together and so on. And we can do visibility together and things like that. There's all these little companies doing their own part, doing their own thing. It's really cool, but nobody's trying to do it in a big way, and they have their reasons for that. But I maintain that the demand is there, because I'm seeing like a big company like Water Gremlin, which makes all kinds of lead products, including fishing lead. Well, they've had Gremlin Green, where they make some lead-free stuff. Arky, another lead jig heads, they've added a lead-free line. Bullet Weights, another company that makes weights for bass fishing mostly. And they have all the lead-free stuff, because not only is it good for environment, and they still make lead stuff too, but they make the steel, they make the brass, they make these harder sinkers that these anglers want for both environmental and the fat performance reasons. So inroads are being made. One of my favorite songs is Small Axe by Bob Marley and the Wailers, because you chip away, and all of a sudden, the whole thing falls. You didn't think anything was really happening until all of a sudden you hear that crash. And down comes the lead market, because we get everybody to switch. What happens? The bottom drops out of the market, and there's nothing, these guys are forced to quit.
Do you also think as more areas in the United States start to push for lead-free, because you mentioned a couple, like 5 states or something, I think, that don't allow lead, or it has to be under a certain level. If more states enact those types of regulations, that could also push the market, because then it would be required.
Yeah, I'm on the fence about that. Legislation has its place. It certainly was what they needed to do in the Northeast, because I saw this direct link. Mm-hmm. They were coming desperately low on this animal. It was being pushed toward, extinction. And they had to get on their pony and get legislation and make people stop, or tell them to stop, or put a little teeth in it. And that's okay with me there. But like Minnesota has huge lead-free fishing education programs. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is a great resource to find out about lead-free companies. They're going that route. Now, some people roll their eyes that it's not fast enough, it doesn't work, it's this, it's that. I maintain that any kind of pressure, or any time informational service we can provide, anytime we can introduce a nice young person like Meg here to the idea that lead is a problem, but we can fix it if we get a new attitude about it, okay? We get the awareness up. That's taking us closer to a solution. Well, and I'll tell you, it's not just Minnesota. Minnesota, Michigan, Canada has barbless hook and is starting to enact lead-free laws on certain waters. As far as my company goes, this is going to both shock and please you, but I get just as many orders out of the Deep South for lead-free tackle as I do out of the Northeast or the Northwest.
Which is great news, because it's not required in those areas, but people are just leaning towards it.
Exactly. It's not. I get more business from out of non-required areas than required areas. We got about 9-10 million fishers in these so-called required areas, but gosh darn it, fishers, really. Everybody, every group, I don't care. Even nice young lady backpackers have a bunch of a-holes, or at least a small number of a-holes in their group. It's just the way it is. And why most fishers are outstanding people that want to be sporting, and I'm not just, butter and bread here. do find that the lady fishers tend to be very, very conservation, very anti-pollution, very, very concerned with being sporting. So we really only have these very tiny, batch of people that spoil it for the rest of us. But they're wanting this. They're wanting this. They're not needing to be, what I say, pushed around by the law. I don't much care for pushing people around with the law without giving them a chance first to do the right thing.
Yeah, and there are a fair number of anglers that listen to this podcast. So do you have any other resources that would be valuable to them to learn more about lead-free fishing? You mentioned the one in Minnesota. Your company would be an example. I'm sure you have resources available on your website, but are there other areas people can look to learn more about it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And number one, get out and educate yourself on the issue. And this applies to non-fishers too. There are tons of loon watch and conservation groups who have websites, and they have a plethora of data on there about the effects of lead on that particular species. And while the loon may be the poster child for this whole movement, lead-free fishing concerns other birds. And there's, swans in Michigan and Minnesota. And even, the other day I saw some swans fly across the road here in Kansas. I want them protected. Bald eagles, everybody's concerned about our national symbol. So these are things that are driving forces to correct the problem, and there are pages and so forth that can give you skinny on how they end up running afoul of lead. This isn't a major research project I'm assigning. It's just look at a few studies so you can grasp the gist of the issue and kind of make sense of what we're trying to do. Now, when you want to get into fishing, or you're still concerned, about this and you just want information, the next is to find and support companies that sell lead-free tackle. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has the best list, I think. But I also sent you fishleadfree.org. They have a wonderful list. Of course, we're on both of them. But I like these because they have the live links and can send you on your way. If you're already doing some lead-free fishing, join a community. You can get on our Facebook lead-free fishing page and show off some of your lead-free catches. And you don't have to be 100% lead-free to enjoy this sort of stuff. I'm not trying to start a religion here, okay? I just want you to get on my lead-free fishing page and show your big fish and show how your lead-free choices are working for you, all righty? I just, I want people to try. When I first listened to your podcast, you had something about how we can't expect people to be perfect. We only want you to kind of strive that way, and you're going to have your own version of what perfect amounts to anyway. So let's not get toxic and, call people names and be exclusionary because they can't afford or can't find or whatever all the lead-free tackle they want to make 100% conversion. If you're going after it, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I love that message. And I'm sure even if you just go in and Google lead-free fishing, that a lot of those resources will pop up. But the ones that you mentioned, I'll include in the show notes so they're easy to access. And how can people learn more about Glasswater Angling and your podcast?
Well, you can go to glasswaterangling.com. That's my company website, and we have all kinds of cool stuff there. You can listen to the Lure Love podcast, which is a podcast I do with Tim Box Bete, and we are big lead-free advocates, although we've spent a lot of our time just doing silly dad humor and doing deep dives on lures and geeking out on lures, but that's another one. You can also find me from time to time on the Lure Love podcast, although that podcast kind of comes out irregularly. You can also find me on Instagram at Crappie Hippie. You can find me on Instagram at Lead Free Fishing. You can find me on Instagram at Lure Love Podcast, and you can find me on Instagram at Glasswater Angling. I've gotten so busy I don't keep up with my feeds like I'd like to, but I've made a bunch of feeds when I first started out because it was the only thing I knew to do involving marketing that didn't cost a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot to keep up with social media, but I'll share your handles and links and stuff if people want to check out those different pages. And with that, did you have any last bits of advice or anything else that you wanted to share?
Sure. I just want to say that, non-anglers can be involved in this, and go ahead and learn these companies and go ahead and learn a little bit about this, because you may mess up and have a crazy fisher in your life that you want to buy a gift for. And now you'll know what to get them. Or you may have a kid or a grandkid or something that needs to get started, and you'll know what you want to start them with. Go lead free, please. Other than that, I would just say my last word of advice, if you're having trouble finding lures that are lead free, then make them. I've been really proud to get to know a whole bunch of jig tires as I've progressed with this company. Jig heads are our number one selling thing. I couldn't be more delighted that fishers are not waiting for the market to catch up to them. They're doing an end run around the situation and building their own lures and taking their own lead-free message built with their own hands out into the field and doing things. So don't be afraid to look into doing your own thing. It's easy, it's fun, and I warn you, it's addictive, but you can get into some lead-free fishing and know that while you're building that lure, you're doing a good thing. And if you lose that lure, it's making an impact, but not with a deadly toxin like lead. So I just wish everybody to get out. You probably already have a ton of lead-free lures in your box. You probably already have Daredevil spoons or MEP spinners or Rebel Slim Minnow or something that's already lead-free just because that's the way it's always been made. We know you can catch fish on lead-free lures. Change the rest of that stuff over. Metals will sink. Lead's not the only one. Change those things over as you can. Don't beat yourself up where you can't make a change, but just keep working towards it, all right? Just keep working towards it, and say a little prayer for me when you're out there, because I'm working towards it with you, and we're going to meet in the middle, and we're going to get this problem solved.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone else did too. So thanks again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Meg.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. New content has begun to appear on the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon. Head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com for more information about our listener support and patron exclusives. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.